I've always had an interest in filters and textures in my photography, even going back to my film and darkroom days. I had a set of texture negatives that could be printed alongside another negative. In the early days of digital photography, when we were using cameras with as little as 1 million pixels in the sensor, filters helped us to cover up the fact that 1 million pixels didn't quite give us a consistent photo quality. Now that's all changed, as we know, but I still find filter effects appealing. But they do need to be the right filter effect for the right image, which is one of those easy things to say, but not quite so easy to explain. What is the right image? From my own point of view, I would say that I tend to recognize a picture when I see it, but of course that's not overly helpful, I know. But of course the more you do this filtering, the better you get at selecting a more appropriate image. In general, bold content like this house works best. Images with fine detail rarely do, but never say never, because there's always going to be an exception. I also feel it's best to decide what size we want the image and what we want the image for before we start to filter it. Otherwise we can create a great effect at high resolution, which looks awful when reduced to the size for a slideshow or an email attachment or a web image. Filter effects and textures don't always take kindly to large adjustments in image size once the texture has been applied. Try adding a canvas texture, for example, to a 20 megapixel image, and then reduce the image in size to say 1920 1080 or thereabouts. The texture doesn't look that good at all. So I find filters look better on a lower resolution image. And when you think what we're doing, we're deliberately moving away from true photo quality by applying the filter in the first place. So image size and pixel count is now not such a big issue as it normally is. So I find it's best to create the image so that what we see is what we get. Now in my two examples here of finished images, even at this size you're not seeing exactly what we're going to get, because I made these slightly larger than the screen we're viewing them on. If I take you to the zoom tool and we look at this at 100%, now you can get a better feel for not only the texture, let's have a look at the border as well, so we can see a bit of the content, bit of the color, bit of the texture on the image. I've added a little bit of a border and put some texture on that too, and a thin line around the outer edge. And much the same with the other one, which was just a black and white conversion with a hint of color coming through. So let's make a start with this image, which was shot quite a few years ago with a Canon EOS 1DS, and that recorded 11 million pixels. I think what I'll do is just have a look at a crop to begin with. So I'm going to make sure I don't have my 16:9 crop set, so I want to make sure I've got a normal setting. So I'm just going to choose the part of the image which I quite like myself. I think that looks okay. I don't want too much of the sky, because I think, in actual fact, I think I'll do the bottom part, because the sky doesn't have a lot of tone in it, although I'm sure we can bring some of it out. You do notice that that is not entirely upright. I could, I suppose, come in just a little bit and do a bit of adjustment, and if I liked what I saw, just touch the enter key, and that is the section that we're going to use. There's a couple of marks in the sky. I very much doubt we're going to see those by the time we've finished our manipulation, but it's not bad practice, is it, to deal with them anyway, just in case. So let's very quickly do that by selecting our brush, and from the bottom right of the screen, the visualize spots, and there we can see some of the spots clearly shown to us. so we may as well deal with them. But as I said, I very much doubt we're going to see these after we've finished, but we'll deal with them nonetheless. There's probably one or two in the water as well, but they're probably a little bit of leaves and bits and pieces rather than spots. I think we've got all we need to worry about. So let's think about manipulating the image. One of the things we can do, of course, is to try to remain with a smart object as long as possible. If I go down to that bottom hyperlink, center bottom of the screen, and click, here you can see I've got the little box tick to open this up as a smart object. Now you can see that I've cropped the image. My 11 million pixel image is now dropped to 9.7, but that's quite okay. But I do want to do, I've noticed a bit of a smudge there. Let's touch that while I've got the brush in place. That looks a bit better. Touching the H key to move to the hand tool, just moving back to my basic tab and just looking at the image and deciding what I feel I need to do. Let me drop down the highlights and we'll take a look at what that does. Not a great deal. So if I brought down the exposure, I'm going to affect everything, so let's not do that. I think we'll have a bit of clarity. I think we'll have a bit of vibrance too. And sometimes when we're dealing with filters, we can afford to push the colour a little bit higher. But of course, we can always adjust it a little bit later on too. So what I may do here is just give a bit of tone in the sky, perhaps with a graduated filter. That may not be a bad place to start. Remember, it saves the last settings, and if we look over on the right hand side, there's quite a few in there, so rather than mess about setting those, right click, reset a local correction settings, touch the V key to lose the bounding box. Now I've got that quite clear. Now I like the tone I've applied to the sky, but it's rather too warm. The overall picture has a cool look to it, so maybe I'll just drop the temperature down a little bit there, just a little bit. I don't want too much though. Take a bit of saturation off there. I just want just a hint maybe of blue rather than a warm colour. And I could try doing the same thing at the bottom. I'm not sure I like that. Now let's move that up a little bit, so the blue's okay at the top, but maybe not at the bottom with the water. But that's all I really wanted to do. Maybe I could just hold in the edges with a radial filter. Let's have a look at that. Right click inside, reset, touch the V, and just a little bit of exposure. Hit the H key. I think I'll just tweak the vibrance a little more, but I think we'll make a start with what we have. So I'm going to open up this image as a smart object into Photoshop. Now it's about now I would be thinking about what size to actually work with this image. We could be preparing something for print purposes, and then it depends how big a print you wanted to make. It could be a huge one, it could be something small. We could be preparing an image maybe for a slideshow, in which case we're going to be somewhere around the HD resolution. But there are times even when we may be preparing an image just for a website, and we may need the image quite small before we start to filter it. So if I take you to the image menu here and image size, you'll notice we've got 4000 by 24. Well, let me simulate maybe a middle range by saying to myself, well, in normal circumstances with my 20 megapixel cameras, I'm sort of up somewhere between 6 and 4000, maybe a little below that. So why don't we say here that link the width and the height together, and let's say we're going to be happy with around about 2500 pixels on the width. So I'm going to click OK, then I'll hit Control 0 to fit the image back on screen, and I'll bring my layers out on screen as well, I think, and you can see that we've got the smart object icon showing us on the bottom right corner of the thumbnail. Some of the more modern third-party filters we use, when we apply the filter, it automatically creates the filtered image on a separate layer, which is a good thing. but I can never seem to remember which ones do that. We also have a degree of flexibility, of course, because we have a smart object here, but I still like to actually have one original up my sleeve. So I'm going to right click and make a new smart object via copy. So we'll leave this one sitting at the bottom of the layers for a moment. This is the one we're going to open up into our filter pack. Here I'm going to use Topaz impression filters. So I'm going to go to my filter drawer, Topaz and impression 2. Now part of the fun of applying filters, of course, is going down all the various presets that we can see on the right hand side and picking one that we think works for us. I think the important thing is to try to pick something that maybe not be perfect straight out of the box, but we may have to put our own little twist on it. But we have to go with what pleases us. Well, I've had a look in advance just to save a bit of video time, and I settled on quite a chunky filter called Impasto 1. So if I whiz down here, I should find that somewhere. I think I whizzed down a little bit too far there. There it is. Now these filters take just a couple of seconds, but you can see it's quite a dramatic filter on this particular image. And we do have options here to change it. If we click in the middle, it shows us what stroke that it's using, so we could try one of the others and we could see if that gives us something more appealing or less appealing. But I've been through all of these as well, and there's probably a good reason why this one is selected, because it tends to probably work best. So I'm going to go down here and click OK to apply that filter. Now we can see our layers palette looking considerably different. Because we were working with a smart object, we also have the filter that we've just applied as a smart filter. So we've got a number of options here. I can double click my thumbnail and I can be back into Camera Raw, and if I wanted to make an adjustment here, it's going to be applied. Well, tell you what, let me show you what happens. Let me just put a little bit more saturation in and click OK. You'll notice after a few seconds that we will suddenly disappear into Topaz impression, and it looks like we're being invited to apply the filter again, but given a little time and patience, it's applied and it's brought back to where we first started. So working with a smart object, we do have the opportunity to try various options. Now we could be here for a week trying the various options, but one of them I suppose could have been a black and white conversion. But of course we would just click OK, give the software just a few seconds to work, and then I think we would try all the different options we could think of until we found something that we felt worked pretty well. But as you can see, even a slight change, and I just need those few seconds to allow Topaz to work on my filter or my image and then present it to me back in Photoshop. In addition to being able to do that, I also have a layer mask, which means if I select the layer mask and if I just pick up my black colour and a nice soft edge brush, if I've got my flow rate at 5% there, so if I wanted to bring more detail through, I can start painting over here. Let me increase the flow to about 20%, and you can see that I could bring through the original image from beneath, and that's even without having this one in place. I needn't have that for what I'm doing here. What I don't like about what I'm doing here, although I've overdone it for demo purposes, let me reflood that with white. White is my background colour, so Control Backspace will reset my mask. So if you did want to do this, particularly up this end where we're beginning to lose the boats completely, maybe we would drop the flow rate down to 10% or a little bit less, and we would work a little bit more delicately and measured, and you can see what I mean with just a couple of sweeps of my graphics tablet pen there. But I think the problem is when you start to do that and go from a filter effect like I've applied here, which is quite heavy, and we go back to the original, maybe the difference between the two is a little bit too marked. So maybe I've got a suggestion here. Let me reset this by once again hitting Control Backspace. By the way, if I change my mind about the Topaz impression filter as well, you can see here if I double click this, we should be opening up in Topaz, and I could make adjustments to the filter effect that I applied. But I'll cancel that. So we've got a lot of options by having a smart object, but I'm still going to go back to this one because I'm going to open this up back into Topaz because I've got a suggestion or a thought that I'll go to the same filter, but what I'll do is I'll try to lessen the impact of that filter. So Impasto 1 was the filter I wanted. There it is. Just give that a second to draw. But what I want to do is to get to the controls. Now they will pop up in the middle, but if you just click, there they are. That's what I wanted to get to. Looking right at the top there, we get the choice of the number of strokes. Well, if we have more strokes, wouldn't we get more photo quality? Well, let's try that. And you can see there we can now see a lot more of the boats, but maybe not entirely as much up here as we would like. But I think that's not a bad place to start. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to open that up as well. Just for a minute, I'll turn the top one off and we'll just concentrate on the one beneath. I think what I'd like to do here first of all is just bring a little bit of detail a little more back here, but I need to be quite subtle with it, maybe a little bit here but not a great deal. And I think to do that I'll use the mask. I'll use my black, my soft edge brush, 100% opacity, but I'm going to drop my flow rate down to even 5%, and I was able to do that with number key 05 because this little icon is checked. So I want to make sure, of course, I think the bridge up here is quite a nice feature, but I do not want to lose too much of the boats back here. And maybe the other thing is the trees. The trees are coming up as a bit of a blob, so maybe I could just take a bit of care and maybe bring back a little bit there. And this is exactly the same as what we normally do with Photoshop. There's always that temptation to push the flow rate up and speed up what we're doing, but it's almost always a mistake. I like all the effect of the filter around here. I just need that slight variation. So now I can turn this one back on and I can turn to the mask there. In fact, what I suppose I could do is hold the Alt key and drag the mask up. Do I want to replace it? Yes, I do. So now I've got the masking coming right the way through. But what I'd like to do with this mask maybe is make a much bigger brush. Maybe I'll just lose some of those heavy brush marks in the sky so we're not drawn up there a little bit too much. Maybe around the edges of the trees. This is all pure personal, of course, but we have a picture there. Let's say we're happy with that because, as you probably recognize, we could go on forever here. So we could save this as a Photoshop file and keep that little layered set up our sleeve, but let's go for it. Let's go to the top right, choose to flatten the image and think about what we need to do, because I don't know about you, but it's taken away a little bit of the sparkle, maybe the contrast. Do we need contrast in a painterly effect? Well, that's, I think, a personal choice. Do we need a bit more colour? They're all personal choices, but we need to try them until we find something we're really happy with. What I'm going to do is take my image into Camera Raw via the Camera Raw filter. Now I suppose you could say, well, why didn't you do that when you had the opportunity with the layers on the right hand side when they were still smart objects? But whilst it's great to have a smart object, we can hardly claim with an image like this that we're protecting the image quality. We're taking a decision, in fact, to move away from photo quality. So I think it's quite okay, and I've done this for quite a long time. Filter, camera raw filter. The reason I go in the camera raw filter is because I've become so familiar with the camera raw tools, and I like to work with what they give me. So I'm going to have a look at just a little bit of clarity, just to see if I can get a bit of sparkle. Let me double click that. See what I mean? It's just giving a bit of definition to the picture, which I find I like. May even add a little bit more vibrance, but as I keep saying, these things are all really personal. And I suppose I could do a little bit more darkening at the top of the sky if I wanted to, and what's to stop me from applying another graduated filter. And I suppose what we could also do here, we could have a look at applying colour to our graduated filter. So if we click the panel here, for example, maybe we could try the colours and see if there's something here. Remember, we're looking at this with 100% saturation, so just drag this across as a guide to see if something there grabs your attention. I mean, the blue, when you get the right blue, it doesn't look too bad. So I think when we get to somewhere around there, and if we drop that saturation down a bit, I think I could live with that okay. A little bit of a weakness around the edges and the corners still, even despite the fact I used the radial filter. So maybe I could even think about that. But of course, I think this image works pretty much as it is. So I'm going to OK that to open it back into Photoshop. Let me pick up my zoom as well, and we'll look at this at 100%, so you just get a better feel for the size of the picture we created to manipulate. And you can see what I mean. It looks, I think, even better when we see it at the size it's going to be created. So what I'm going to do here is maybe just add a little bit of a texture to the image, because I feel if I'm going to print this, or even if I'm putting it into a slideshow, textures are quite nice to experiment with too. Now we can build in a degree of flexibility here too if we wish. Rather than just applying the texture to the image or a copy of the image, if we go to the layers menu at the top of the screen and choose new layer, what we can do here from the mode, if you drop down to overlay, what we're going to do is to create a new layer in overlay blend mode, but I'm going to tick the box to fill the overlay with a neutral colour, 50% grey. Now you would think it's odd that we've got 50% grey sitting above this image and yet we can still see the image. But of course if we move the overlay to normal, for example, well, that's what we'd see. While we've got this in overlay, we can apply textures to this layer. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to go to my filters menu, texture, texturizer. You're probably familiar with the fact that you'll have 4 or 5 textures here. Burlap is a good one. Canvas, of course, is the old favourite. This is a texture which can be a problem if we try to apply it to a high resolution image, because it's actually, the weave becomes too tight, and rather than looking like a genuine canvas, it just looks like a mistake. But most of the time we would have this up at quite a high level. Generally speaking, I think with these textures on an image like this, we're going to need the relief a little bit low, anything from 1 to 4. There are occasions when we need to go higher, but of course it's personal choice once again. We've also got the opportunity to add different types of textures. We can load textures from here. Now I think I put a few of these on here for another video I recorded. So we need to pick up, let's pick up paper, currency paper, close weave, canvas. It's probably much the same as what we had. Linen is one of my favourites, so I'm going to go with that and take a look. You can see this sort of effect. So I get the opportunity of adjusting the scaling to what I want. I can adjust the relief. The relief looks okay, but maybe I'll push it just for demo purposes if you don't mind. And I'll click OK. But it's best if we look at this at print size or at 100% size, because that is the effect we've applied. But because it's on a new layer, if I change my mind a little bit later on, I can just dump it. But I quite like it. But whenever we add filters to layers like this, we can always temper them a little bit. For example, once we've applied the texture, I could go to my edit menu and choose to fade the texture. So I could drop the impact of the texture and get exactly the effect I'm looking for. If I want something super delicate, then I can do that. I think it looks okay, somewhere around there, so let's live with that. You can see as I reduce the size of the image though, we start to lose the charm. And this is what I was trying to describe when talking about the size of the image in relation to the filter effect that we're applying. Now just for the moment, let me turn this layer off and we're going to create yet another. I'm going to go to Layer, New. I'm going to do exactly the same as we did just a few moments ago. Choose Overlay and fill it with 50% grey. But what we could also do if we wanted further flexibility is we could change this layer into a smart layer, and we do that by going to Layers, Smart Objects, Convert to a Smart Object. So now when I go to Filter, Texture, Texturizer, and I'll load something different just for interest. Let's look at charcoal on paper. I can't remember what that's like, but let's take a look. Let's live with what we can see there just for a moment, and I'll click OK. Because as you see, once we get the texture in place, if the texture started to affect one part of the image a little too much, now we've made this a smart object, we've got a mask, which we could have applied anyway, but we can also go back and adjust the texture. So if I'm not keen on the texture after all, I can double click, I can load, and I can try something else. What have we got down here? Parchment. That sounds as if it might be interesting. And there we have parchment. We've got the scaling again and relief. This one perhaps could do with a bit more, I don't know. Let's click OK. Well, you can see how we can jump around different textures using the smart object status. Let me try just one more. Let me double click the texturizer again, load a texture. Let's go to paper rough, put the scaling up quite a bit, and you can see the relief is quite low at 6. Usually I'll be a little bit lower than that, but let's say we were happy with that. But there are times when we're using textures like these. Let me double click or go to 100%. If the texture was affecting some areas of the image a little bit over much, then of course we do have the mask. We've got black selected. We can pick up a brush, drop the flow rate down to be quite low. I'll just do a bit on the edge of the boat there, but I could lessen the impact in certain areas, and this are the sorts of things I think which can sometimes improve an image, because you don't want to take all of the texture away, because if you're going to print the image, but if it's an on-screen image, you can manipulate where the texture shows to your heart's content. Now I brought you back into the texturizer because I've opened it up again from that smart object, and I've chosen a glass filter called Frosted Glass. Around it's almost maximum in its size, but of course something like that I think works quite well. What I don't want is to have all those squares showing up, so I want this to be quite big so that that shows just about as we see it here on the picture. The relief again is personal, and we do get the opportunity to change the way the light appears, so we can have it coming from the bottom, which does change it considerably. I tend to go for bottom left, top right, but they're all subtle differences, and also the invert, which doesn't make a great deal of difference. And I think that one looks quite pleasant with the watercolour effect we've got there, although it's called, as we saw, impasto. So what I'm going to do here is flatten all this to finish. The one problem with any filter effect, I think, or any creative work, is sometimes knowing when to stop. Sometimes it's a good thing to know, right, that's it, no more work, but other times we just do one or two other steps and maybe we find a better picture. Well, we don't find out unless we experiment, so to leave this video, let me just suggest one other thing that I may consider doing. All the way through creating this image, I must admit monochrome was in my mind a little bit. So maybe I could take the layer that we've flattened together here, go to my layers and make that into a smart object for a moment. I could then use whatever tools I want to use to make it a black and white, because we do have some in the image editing tools here. But I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to go back to camera raw. I'm going to take the saturation off, looking at the histogram at the top there, a little bit of clarity. Bring the blacks down. You can see the histogram spreads to the left, the whites up, histogram spreads to the white. Suddenly we've got quite a degree of sparkle in there. Got a little bit of a weakness on that top corner, I would suggest, so if I did want to do something I could do that here. Not going to take very much, just dropping the size down, drag in my graduated filter, right click and reset it, because all I want is a very delicate, just something like that. That's all I need, and I'll click OK to open this up. Because we created a smart object, not only do we get the opportunity to go back in camera raw and adjust what we've just done, but we do get the mask again. So if I select black and my soft edge brush and the flow rate, which I may even want to go down even lower, I'm going to do this with the image fully on screen, but you could choose to just add a hint of colour in strategic areas, which may give your image a little more charm. It's all going to be awfully personal, isn't it? But you can see that we do start to create something a little different. I suppose another tack with what I've done here, if I flood that with white, that mask with white, if I make my brush much bigger, I could just do a real broad area just to bring through the colour delicately in that particular spot. And I think at some stage I have to say we are done. Just one last tip to finish. If you want to see your image as big as possible on screen, removing all of the tools around the edge of the window, touch the F key once and twice, and there we have it. And when you're ready to return to the main screen, you touch the F key once again.